Characterization or character is one of the elements of fiction or one of the tools that authors use in order to develop a narrative. There are a couple different things we want to pay attention to when we're considering characterization. We want to pay attention to direct descriptions of the character, physical descriptions, as well as descriptions of maybe what they sound like, how they move. We want to pay attention to things that the character says, speech actions, as well as internal thoughts that they may have to themselves. We want to also pay attention to what the character does, their literal actions in the story. And finally, we want to consider the character's effect on others. So, using Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, be sure to have read the story before continuing with the video. I want to just point to a couple of ways in which character development is occurring. In the first couple of lines, Kate Chopin introduces us to our main character, Mrs. Mallard. Mrs. Mallard is somebody who is described as having heart trouble, and when others are tasked with breaking bad news to her, they take great care and deliver that news in broken sentences and veiled hints. Taken together, that direct clue or that direct description of Mrs. Mallard as having heart trouble, as well as the effect she has on other people, causing them to give her a bad news with great care or in broken sentences, paint a picture of her as somebody who is maybe a little bit on the weaker side or somebody who is fragile. As we continue throughout the narrative, once she gets the news that her husband has been in some sort of accident, she weeps with sudden and wild abandonment, again, leading us to sense her to be a very emotional character, somebody that, again, is a little bit on the fragile side, somebody who is, of course, very much affected by this news of her husband's passing. The other thing we want to consider, though, when we think about characterization is not just how a character is defined initially, but we also want to think about the ways in which a character changes over time. And oftentimes, looking at the way a character changes over time will give us some clue about the theme or the meaning of the text as a whole. As we look at the latter half of the story, what's happening in this moment is that Mrs. Mallard has retreated to a back room, and she's been sort of laying on a chair thinking about the loss of her husband. And then there's a shift in her. Suddenly, she's being described as somebody whose bosom is falling, rising and falling tumultuously. This description gives us a little bit more life, a little bit more vigor. She then speaks to herself or thinks to herself, speaking under her breath, that she is free, 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 right? The repetition of that word, too, is to emphasize this idea that she's having to herself. We also get a description of her as being keen and bright, and suddenly her pulse is beating fast. So if we take this description and we compare it to the description that we get in the first paragraph, she's weak and timid, and as we get towards the end of the narration, she's having this moment of vitality, this moment of feeling alive or having a greater sense of strength. And this is very much connected to her realization that her husband has passed, and that in his passing, she's going to get a kind of freedom to live without him.